Okay, so you want to own a construction company. Buy some trucks, hire a crew, start pouring concrete, and watch the checks come in. Here's the first thing that should stop you before you go any further. A construction company can be booked solid, win the biggest contracts in its city, and still be weeks away from going under. And it's not just small operations this happens to. Even massive revenue doesn't buy you safety in this industry. Take the largest construction company in America. Last year it brought in $29.2 billion in revenue. Most people hear a number like that and assume the owners must be getting rich. Here's the part they don't tell you out of every dollar that came through that company. Only about 3 cents actually stayed behind as profit. So, where did the rest of it go? That's the question that decides whether you build a fortune in this business or lose everything trying. Because 2 contractors can do the exact same work, win the exact same size of contract, and one of them walks away wealthy while the other quietly goes bankrupt without ever making a single mistake anyone could point to. If you own a construction company and you don't know the answer to that question, you are one bad year away from finding out the hard way. Here's what makes this stranger than it sounds. Construction moves roughly $17 trillion a year worldwide. That's not a niche industry scraping by, that's trillions of dollars changing hands every single year. And yet, despite all that money moving through it, most companies in this business are operating on margins so thin that a single bad month can wipe out a year of work. So how does an industry drowning in cash still bankrupt the people running it? I'm going to show you a company that looked completely unstoppable, one of the biggest builders in an entire country. Tens of thousands of employees, government contracts, record payouts to its own owners, and then, in less than a year, it was gone. Not slowly. Almost overnight. And the reason it collapsed has nothing to do with bad luck, and everything to do with a mistake almost every construction owner makes without realizing it. By the time we get there, you'll understand exactly why. In construction, the buildings are the easy part. The money is the hard part. So here's the number that changes everything. A contractor can land a billion-dollar project, the kind of contract that makes headlines, the kind that makes them look like the most successful builder in the city, and still only keep about $30 million of it once the job is finished. That sounds like a fortune, until you realize what it actually is. $30 million of reward attached to $1 billion of risk. Every delay, every price spike, every mistake on that job could just as easily have erased that $30 million and put them underwater instead. You're not being paid for the size of the project. You're being paid for surviving it. And here's the part that breaks how most people picture this industry entirely. The company whose name is on the building, the one everyone assumes is making the real money, is often not the one profiting the most. The electrician wiring the place, the plumber running the pipes, the crew nobody outside the industry even notices they frequently walk away with a better margin than the general contractor whose name is on the sign out front. Less exposure, less scheduling chaos, a smaller slice of the blame if something goes wrong, and a bigger cut of what's actually left over. In construction, being the biggest name on the project and being the one who makes the most money are 2 completely different things. Now, you probably assume you can start a construction company with a pickup truck and a set of tools. You can if you want to run a one-person handyman operation. But if you want to bid on real commercial or municipal work, the entry price alone runs from $50,000 to over $220,000. Before you've poured a single yard of concrete licenses, insurance, bonds, equipment, all of it due before you've earned a cent. Most people assume that's the hard part. It isn't. Here's the trap inside the trap. Your crew shows up and expects to get paid this week. Your material supplier expects to get paid this month. Your equipment rental is due whether the job is finished or not. And your client might not pay you for 60 to 90 days, sometimes longer. So think about what that actually means. You are personally funding a project for a client who hasn't paid you yet, out of your own pocket for months, while everyone working for you still expects to be paid on time. Miss that, and it doesn't matter how good your work is. Roughly half of all new construction companies fail within their first year, not because they built anything badly, but because they ran out of cash while waiting to get paid for work they'd already finished. Being busy is not the same thing as being financially healthy. In this industry, winning the work doesn't solve your problem. It creates a new one, because now you have to fund the project before your customer ever does. And this right here is the single mistake that quietly kills more construction companies than bad workmanship ever will. Running the business like it's in the business of building things, when really, it's in the business of managing cash. Everything else you're about to see is just that same mistake showing up in a different costume. Stay with me, because once you actually win the contract, it gets even more dangerous. Now let's talk about actually winning the job, because you'd assume the lowest bid always wins a contract. It doesn't, and honestly, it shouldn't. Sophisticated clients weigh your safety record, your financial health, and your track record alongside your price. Here's the dirty secret of competitive bidding. The contractor who submits the lowest number usually isn't the smartest business in the room. They're the one who made a mistake on their estimate, forgot to include part of the scope, and is about to find that out the hard way. In the industry, this is called the winner's curse. You won the job. Congratulations, you also guaranteed yourself a loss before you poured a single foundation. And once work starts, labor becomes the most dangerous line item of all, because it can silently balloon on you without anyone noticing. If your crew was estimated to need 400 hours and actually takes 500, you don't get to bill the client for that difference. You eat it directly out of your profit. With net margins hovering around 5 to 8%, one serious mistake pouring a foundation just 18 inches off the mark, say, can trigger enough rework to consume 10% of the entire project budget. Do that math yourself. Your margin was 8%. Your mistake cost 10%. You didn't just lose your profit. You paid for the privilege of building the thing. This isn't theoretical. In 2016, a company called Carillion looked like it was at the peak of its power, the second largest construction and services company in the entire United Kingdom, employing over 43,000 people, running government hospitals and highway contracts across the country, paying its shareholders a record dividend. 10 months later, it shocked the market by writing down £845 million in the value of its own contracts. Its share price lost 70% of its value in 2 days. By January 2018, it collapsed into liquidation with just £29 million in cash and liabilities that eventually totaled nearly $7 billion. How does a company that large, run by people who understood construction better than almost anyone in Britain, collapse this fast? Not incompetence. The exact same mistake we already talked about, just scaled up to a size that made it impossible to hide. Carillion grew through acquisitions funded by borrowed money, bid aggressively on low-margin public contracts to keep revenue climbing, and kept paying rising dividends even as its cash position quietly deteriorated, because a falling dividend would have signaled weakness. In other words, it kept behaving like a company that was thriving, when the actual cash underneath it was disappearing. Carillion wasn't destroyed by one bad decision. It was destroyed by treating growth and appearance as the goal, instead of cash. Thin margins, heavy borrowing, and a public image built on projects that were quietly bleeding money the entire time. Which raises the obvious question. If this business is this dangerous, Why do people still get rich doing it? Here's the honest answer: the ones who get rich don't avoid these risks. Almost nobody does. They just refuse to run the business blind to them. And here's the part: almost nobody outside the industry understands the danger doesn't stop once you're profitable. It might actually get worse. Here's something that should terrify anyone about to sign their first commercial contract. You can finish the building, hand over the keys, watch the client walk through the doors of something you built with your own crew, and still be waiting months to see a serious chunk of the money you're actually owed. There's a name for that gap in the industry: days sales outstanding. But forget the term for a second and just sit with what it means. A software company waits maybe a month to get paid. You in construction wait 60 to 90 days, sometimes longer, while every invoice crawls through a chain of people who all have to sign off before a single dollar moves. And it gets worse. On top of that wait, your client is legally allowed to hold back 5 to 10% of every payment on purpose. It's called retainage as insurance, that you'll come back and fix every small defect once the project's done. Now do the math on what that actually means for you. If you're running a 6% profit margin and your client is sitting on 10% of the project in retainage, they are holding more cash than your entire expected profit for months after you already did all the work, took all the risk, and handed over a finished building. You can walk off that job site having delivered exactly what you promised and still be in a hole, financed entirely by your own line of credit, waiting on money that was yours the moment you laid the last brick. This is the part almost nobody outside the industry understands, and it's worth saying twice. Revenue, completed work, and actually being paid are three completely different things. You can do everything right and still not have the money. So let's do the math the way you'd actually have to live it, two versions of the same year. In the optimistic scenario, you're running $50 million in annual revenue at a healthy 6% net margin. That's $3 million in profit. Projects came in on schedule, material costs stayed close to your estimates, your safety record kept insurance flat. Life is good. Now the realistic scenario: steel prices spike 18% mid-project and you didn't have a clause protecting you. One foundation error triggers rework that eats 5% out of a major job. A single safety violation costs you over $165,000. And your average client is taking 90 days to pay instead of 30, so you're financing your own payroll off a line of credit just to keep the lights on. Run that same $50 million in revenue through that reality, and your 6% margin doesn't just shrink. It can flip into an outright loss. You didn't build worse buildings in the bad year. You built the exact same buildings. What actually changed wasn't luck steel spikes, slow-paying clients, and the occasional bad foundation aren't rare accidents in this industry. They're the cost of doing business. What changed was whether you were prepared for them before they happened, whether you'd written an escalation clause into the contract, kept enough cash in reserve, lined up credit before you needed it. The company that survives the bad year isn't the one that got lucky. It's the one that already knew the bad year was coming. So is owning a construction company a bad investment for you? Not necessarily. But it demands you treat the business less like a builder and more like a financial institution that happens to produce buildings someone who understands retainage and cash flow as fluently as they understand concrete and steel. The tools, the trucks, the crew, that's the easy part. Anyone with enough starting capital can assemble those in a matter of weeks. What separates the contractor still standing in year 10 from the one who quietly disappears in year 2 was never how well they built. It was whether they respected the gap between what they were owed and what was actually sitting in their bank account. If this changed how you think about a business you thought you understood, That's exactly why we made this video. Subscribe if you want more of the numbers behind the industries everyone assumes they already understand. And next time, we're breaking down a business that looks even simpler on the surface and turns out to be even more dangerous underneath.